The views expressed during this program are not necessarily those of the staff and management of Viper Broadcasting. Please limit your calls to one per hour. Live from Studio C, it's the KRMS Morning Magazine. Your phone calls are welcome at 573-302-7000 or call toll-free 1-866-372-1270. Now, here's hour number one of the KRMS Morning Magazine on News Talk 1150 KRMS and 97.5 KRMS FM.
Good morning. 9:11 is our time. Thanks for joining us. It is the KRMS Morning Magazine for this 17th day of December 2018. 37 degrees now and a mostly clear sky on our way to a high of about 55. It's going to be incredible today. Just a beautiful day to be alive and live at the Lake of the Ozarks. We'll hit a high in the mid-50s today. Looks like 30 for the low tonight. Partly cloudy and 55 tomorrow. And then we'll hit the low tomorrow night of around 38 as we see the clouds increase. Talking maybe a little bit of rain late on your Wednesday with a high 56, a low 40. Showers likely on Thursday with a high 45, a low 32. Then partly cloudy on Friday, high 43, low 29. Partly cloudy on Saturday, high 49, the low of 30 degrees. 37 degrees, a clear sky. Nothing showing up on our in-studio Doppler weather radar throughout the Tri-County region or throughout the state of Missouri. 9:12 is our time, and we're happy to have him back to talk about firearms and the Second Amendment and anti-gunners and what we should all be doing to keep our ears to the ground, our eyes open to make sure that there aren't people out there that are trying to infringe on our Second Amendment rights. Mr. Dan Wos, who is the author of Good Gun, Bad Guy, Good Gun, Bad Guy 2, and working on Good Gun, Bad Guy 3. Good morning to you, sir. How you been?
Oh, excellent, KB. Thanks so much for having me on your show. It's Christmas time up here in New York, and snow is on the ground a little bit, and so it's a good time of year, great time of year, and I'm sure we got a lot of gun stuff to talk about. So where do you want to start?
We certainly do, and I wanted to start with something that's actually going on in your neck of the woods, and that is with a legislator up in New York who has decided that in order to make sure that people firearms aren't falling into the wrong hands, that it's a good idea for us to, I don't know who would do it, but somebody up there in New York wants to look at my Facebook page for 3 years prior before I own a firearm. And I saw that and I thought to myself, well, this is, got to be interesting. At no time have I ever gone off the deep end on Facebook. I mean, and probably you for the most part either, or what could be considered going off the deep end. And that's where I think this is something that is rather interesting because what do we call these people? Do we call them the thought police? Do we call them the language police that are going to go through if something like this were to pass up in the state of New York and go through my Facebook page and say, well, on this day, he looks like he was a little crazy. He went off the deep end. I wasn't talking about hurting anyone. I was just upset that the local donut shop ran out of my donuts and the kind of donuts I like. So maybe I got a little vocal about it, as vocal as I could be on Facebook.
Well, let me answer one of those questions first. What do we call them? Anti-American Constitution shredding nut jobs. And two of them in particular, Eric L. Adams down in Brooklyn, State Senator Kevin Parker, what they've done is they've put together legislation, a proposal that would authorize state police and or local law enforcement authorities, such as the New York City Police Department, to review 3 years of social media history, as well as 1 year of Internet search history of any person purchasing a firearm. Now, the reason this is so dangerous, now me, as a writer, I am constantly searching murder statistics and all sorts of violent crime stuff to put together data for my books. When I read this internet search history, I thought to myself, "Oh my God! If they ever saw mine, it would be a field day for them." But some people do internet searches for specific reasons and aren't necessarily with bad intent So that's a scary piece right there. If they were able to do that for millions of people across this country, millions of good people. The other thing that they put in this proposal, or what they want to do, it says federally. Let me read a little piece. Federally licensed dealers would do the social media and internet background checks as part of their regular background check process, so as to identify any patterns of engaging in, here we go, violent hate speech and or posting threats of imminent violence to themselves or others as part of the criteria used in determining permit approval. So now we have someone in charge of deciding what is violent hate speech. And we all know where that could go with if we put anybody in charge of this stuff from the left wing. So this is it would be a complete disaster. It's unconstitutional on so many levels, and unfortunately, if it were to get passed, it would have to go to court and be defeated.
But see, the problem with something like this, Dan, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, is that you've got somebody in a position of, I guess, I don't want to say power, but that's essentially what it is. And you've got somebody that's even considering doing something like this in the first place. And so that would almost make you think that, is there any possibility that there are other like-minded people that this type of idea that this guy is coming up with, or as they say up in New York, idea.
Well, only parts of New York say that.
Okay, but the point being is that you've got somebody who's been elected to office that is even talking about doing something like this in the first place.
Oh yeah, it is scary, but that's what happens when over the last generation or two, people have been indoctrinated. Now people that are in public office, a lot of them are a victim of that kind of indoctrination or that cultural, conditioning. To be, and when I say that, I mean specifically the anti-gun mindset, because remember, back in the 50s and 60s, there was actually firearms training in schools. It was welcomed. Even in the early 80s, when I was in high school, you'd have friends with rifles in the back of their windows of their pickup trucks and dead animals in the back of the bed, in the back of the truck. So firearms were not a scary thing back then. What happened was the media and politicians induced it. They created a narrative and a landscape where firearms are now a scary thing, and gun owners are somehow recklessly and intentionally putting everyone in danger. So gun owners are the bad guys. So it's the narrative, the overall narrative in the public forum that has changed all this stuff. We need to change that back. There's good news, and I hope we can get to it, about the hunt. We talked briefly about the hunting courses and a couple of other. The Parkland school is now talking about arming teachers because of the Parkland incident. So there's some good news too. I don't want to just be doom and gloom here.
Right. Well, and I understand that. And so we can go to what's going on in the state of Iowa. But first, before we go to that, just real quick, another example of what you're talking about this morning is what the mayor of Pittsburgh is wanting to do, and that's essentially this story from Breitbart following the October 27th attack on the gun and security-free Tree of Life Synagogue, and they make sure to tell you it's gun and security-free, that the mayor voiced opposition to hiring armed guards to protect the congregants there. Also, the mayor's solution is to create gun confiscation orders, ban commonly owned semi-automatic firearms, and ban high-capacity magazines and bump stocks. There are two problems with this proposal. One, they would not prevent another synagogue attack from occurring because the biggest issue in a mass shooting is not the type of gun used, but the amount of time the attacker has to ply his trade. And then it goes on down here. And the second problem with this guy's gun control push is Pennsylvania's preemption law. The law makes it illegal for a municipality to pass gun controls that exceed the controls at the state level. So, couple of issues there, but again, you've got an elected official in a position where he's using a tragedy as an opportunity to confiscate firearms, to do away with certain types of firearms, the high-capacity magazines, the bump stocks, the whole 9 yards. But just as you mentioned before, the fact that we hear this kind of BS, and people are buying into it, because they don't understand both sides of the story.
Yeah, some of them don't understand. Some of them do want to control their portions of society that they can get control of, and some of them are spineless. And what happened, as you can see by just looking back the last 10 or 20 years, as the narrative changed, then politicians started to bend to the public narrative. So they create a narrative, and they get the media on board that creates this fearful gun narrative. I call it the gun fear campaign. And then they have justification now to jump on board to do something about it. And what you're talking about here is with these with these semi-automatic proposal bans and things like that. But what they're doing, see, Democrats are putting people in danger, and they're by disarming good people. And when they do that, when they disarm good people, they embolden the killers, because they take away any opposition of people to defend themselves. We all know that it takes the cops a long time to get to a scene and stop a bad guy. We know that you can't rely on the police department as hard as they may try, and as great a job as they do under the circumstances and the tools that they're given. People need to be able to defend themselves. This is where it goes to need, and not only that it's a right. So this stuff has to go to court. We have to defeat these anti-American gun grabbers, because if we don't, our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren are going to be in big trouble.
No doubt about it. 9:23 is our time, Dan. We're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we'll talk about some of the positive things that you wanted to make sure and get out to the folks as well. And we thank all the folks listening wherever you may be. If you are a regular follower of Dan Wos, we appreciate you joining us here this morning on KRMS. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors. We normally do this with Dan about once a month, relatively speaking, and we do this about the third Monday of every month here on News Talk KRMS.
97.5 and 103.3.
(9:27). We welcome you back to the Morning Magazine on News Talk KRMS. Our guest is Dan Wos, as we're talking a little bit about the Second Amendment, firearms. If you have a question or comment, feel free to give us a call this morning at 302-7000 or 877-330-1150. You can email me as well, live at krmsradio.com. So we got some of that stuff out of the way, Dan, in our first segment. Let's talk a little bit about the positive side, about some things happening, especially with our youth. You talk about a lot of places where you mentioned earlier gun racks in the back of pickup trucks, and going to school and seeing somebody's 22 or something like that in the gun rack, and we just don't see that anymore. There are some places that are kind of going in the opposite direction, in a positive direction, if you will, by teaching kids some of the fundamentals of owning a firearm so that they feel comfortable around them, and obviously so they can be productive, law-abiding citizens enjoying their Second Amendment right.
Yes, that's right. And one in particular, there's a report about North Butler and Clarksville school districts in Hawkeye State have taken an unusual approach in addressing the issue. They have added firearm safety training for students to the curriculum. Now, the interesting thing about this statement is they've taken an unusual approach to addressing the issue, and the issue is school shootings and gun people using guns to do bad things. The idea that they use unusual approach is funny to me because it's really not an unusual approach. It's actually the most common sense approach. If you're going to have guns in society like we do and like we always will, why not teach the kids about them? Why not teach them how to use them safely, like I was taught when I was a kid, and I'm sure you were taught? You and I don't go do bad things with guns. We understand the dangers. We understand what they're capable of, and we use them for enjoyment. And gun ownership is a great thing. So why not help the kids feel less scared, more comfortable, and get educated on it? To me, that makes perfect sense. So I think this thing in Iowa, what these schools are doing, is fantastic. I would love to see this. I've been talking about this for years, and finally someone's coming forward and actually proposing it.
Well, and to do it on that level, I would say that, maybe you live in an area, as far as things go, where it's rural, similar to here at the Lake of the Ozarks, and firearms are pretty much a way of life for a lot of different reasons. Of course, a lot of people that live around this area hunt. A lot of people around this area use their firearm for protection. But the thing about it is teaching someone at a very young age how to properly handle a firearm, how to clean it, how to store it, how to use it properly and be safe. They gain respect for it, and you don't hear about these kids taking a firearm and playing around with it like it's like you're playing around with Hot Wheels or Legos or something like that. This is something that they learn to respect because their parents teach them how to use it and use it properly, and how to respect a firearm, and what it means if you don't keep it clean, and what it means if you horse around with it, and the fact that somebody could get hurt, or even worse, somebody could get killed. And it's that thought process that allows these kids to find respect for the firearm and to use it properly no matter what the situation.
Yeah, and you know what happens with the anti-gun crowd? They like to use the accidental, because you touched on something here that just sparked a thought for me. They like to use the accidental gun deaths as part of their narrative, which by the way is a minuscule, tiny fraction of deaths related to guns in our society. But they still like to use it. They use the toddler and the gun scenario. What this would do would probably almost essentially eliminate that whole thing. Kids getting their hands on guns who don't know what they're doing, because they'd be trained in schools and they understand how to handle firearms. Let me read, if you don't mind, another piece from the Conservative Tribune.
Sure.
It says, while Second Amendment gun control, quote, advocates may be horrified by the idea, the District Superintendent Joel Foster explained the rationale behind it. Teaching young people to control guns is one of the most important lessons they'll ever get. Quote, what we do best is educate our kids, he told Radio Iowa. Quote, we feel if we educate our kids on how to use weapons responsibly, how to respect them, understand it's not a video game, and those sort of things, that maybe we'll cut down on our chances of having a severe incident, end quote. And that's exactly what you're touching on. If the kids understand these things, there's less likelihood that there will be an incident.
Absolutely. And that's something else that we want, because, I remember growing up, and I remember kids that had firearms in their home, and the parents had a firearm, and the kids were allowed to use the firearm as we did when we were growing up, to go hunting and to maybe go to a range and do some target practice and things like that. The kids weren't running around the neighborhood with the firearm, chasing other children, threatening other children. Well, if you don't do what I tell you, I'm going to go home and get my dad's gun and come back here. You never heard conversation like that. And if you did, it was normally some idiot that needed the snot knocked out of him anyway. So it was a situation where when we were kids, we learned to okay, let's go back to some of the fundamentals of parenting or raising kids. Teaching your kids respect, and not just respect for firearms, but respect in general. Respect first and foremost for other people. And then certainly that respect goes in different directions with firearms, with, when you're learning to drive, respecting other motorists on the road, making sure that you're not texting and driving. So you use one of the basic principles or one of the basic pieces of foundation for a child's life, and that's teaching them respect. And once they learn to respect themselves, respect other people, that respect then can go in all different directions. And certainly in a home with a firearm, you want that. You don't want them to fear the firearm. You want them to respect it and understand there are many things that you can do with a firearm, but if you don't respect it, if you don't handle it properly, if you don't get the education necessary, if you don't learn how to take care of it, much like anything else, you're going to have problems. And that's basically, and I think that's just a basic human what do you want to call it, requirement, if you will, is respect.
Yeah, and respect is a great thing to be talking about, because respect for other people is very important. And I always say, there's no such thing as gun violence. There's human violence, and if we were to get to the causes of human violence, we could solve a lot of these problems. Yeah, but the anti-gunners are always focused on the gun, which isn't anywhere near the cause of the problem. The cause of the problem is an area where you're starting to talk about right now with that word respect for other people, respect for other people's property. And here's another thing, a value for life, a value for their own life. Because when a kid doesn't have a value for their own life, they don't hold their life as a valuable thing, they're not going to value or respect other people. So with goals, with a strong family environment, with a lot of those things that we know as traditional American values, children grow up with personal values. They value their life. They understand where they can achieve. They understand where they can go in life, and they have ambition. These are all things that are hugely important that are almost removed from a lot of these kids' lives. And this is an important thing that we should be talking about. I get so frustrated sometimes because the anti-gunners, all they want to talk about is magazine capacity and stuff like that. If they were to talk about real problems, and we got down to the core issues of life and our society and our children and the way they're being raised, we wouldn't have these issues. But they don't want to talk about that stuff. They just want to tell you how scary guns are.
How scary guns are, and how people are entitled to things. That's another aspect of this whole conversation. Is this word entitlement, that everybody needs, or everybody should get a free education, everybody should get free health care. The only problem with all of this is that somebody somewhere has got to pay for it. There is no such thing as a free lunch. Everybody says, maybe once in a while you enjoy a little freedom or liberty. Those are things that we certainly want people to be able to enjoy and to have if you live in this country. But as far as getting everything for free, that's another story entirely. And I think that's where we get off the path quite a bit with this entitlement group or entitlement culture that we are seemingly living in now.
Well, the funny thing about this, and the most obvious thing about this, is we're not all off track. Half of the country is off track, and half of the country can see perfectly clear. We have a definite ideological split down the middle of this country. We have on the left liberal progressive ideology that says, if they're not responsible for anything, everything should be given to them, and they are entitled, and all this stuff we're talking about. And basically they take on this victim mentality, a lack of responsibility kind of thing. These are people who will trip over their own 2 feet and blame the store that happens to be right there, and sue the store that happens to be there alongside of that sidewalk, because they don't take responsibility for themselves, and they're entitled. They think they're entitled to whatever they want. On the other side, we have conservative, traditional American values where people are responsible, but they also say, "Get the hell out of my way and let me live my life, because I'm free. I live by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and no one is going to tell me what to do, where to go, when to do it, or what to think. I'm a free free person. And with that, I think conservative-minded people, traditional American value people, also take responsibility for their failures. Okay, it was my fault. I'm sorry. I will fix it. I'll do whatever I need to do to make it right. And then, along with that, also comes reaping our rewards. We should be able to enjoy the successes, the wealth, the achievements that we create in life. But on the left, they want to take that. It's a completely different mindset, completely different way of looking at life. That's why people are gravitating toward one side or the other right now. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how we're ever supposed to bring these two ideologies together. That's the scary part for me.
9:40 is our time, Dan. We're going to step aside and take another break. Again, your phone calls welcome at 302-7000 or 877-330-1150. Certainly like to hear maybe a little bit from the other side on what they're listening to this morning, and if they feel as though respect is something that is important, and if so, how do you define respect? And certainly, again, making someone feel as though they have worth. And self-worth is something that's very important, as Dan mentioned. We'll take the break, and when we come back, we'll talk some more with our guest, Dan Wos, the author of Good Gun, Bad Guy and Good Gun, Bad Guy 2 on the Morning Magazine on KRMS. 9:45 is our time. Our guest, Dan Wos, with the author-editor of Good Gun, Bad Guy and Good Gun, Bad Guy 2. And he's working on Good Gun, Bad Guy 3, which, did you say the last time we talked that you were pretty close to completing that that particular book, or is it still in the works, or where are you with that?
No, I'm not close. But it's going to take a little while longer. This one is really going to be great. The stuff that I'm going to be talking about in Good Gun, Bad Guy 3 is going to touch more on the political part of what's really going on with the gun conversation. But no, I'm not close yet. Still working on it. In the meantime, I would love for everybody to get Good Gun, Bad Guy and Good Gun, Bad Guy 2 because the series is starting to really unfold now, and it gives gun owners and anti-gunners a real insight as to what's going on with the narrative and what's going on with the mindset and how people are actually being manipulated to fear guns and hate gun owners. All the strategies and tactics and all that stuff I go into great detail. So
right. Well, looking forward to it when it comes out, just like the first two. And again, some good gifts. You know, if you're looking for a nice stocking stuffer, Good Gun, Bad Guy, or Good Gun, Bad Guy 2. A couple of good books for you to read. And kind of let it all sink in and find out what's going on out there in the real world with firearms and the Second Amendment. What are you looking at as we get into as we wrap up 2018? We're getting ready for 2019. Do you see as the Democrats take over the House in 2019 in January when they're all sworn in, this new group that's going to be sworn in, the Democrats will have the House, the Republicans will have the Senate. Do we see a lot in your mind getting done? Do we see a lot more things along the lines of trying to go after law-abiding, Second Amendment-loving citizens of this country?
Yeah, I really do see a lot more attacks on gun owners in America. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but I see that coming with some of the rhetoric, how it's starting to heat up right now. So what I think is going to happen is a lot of this stuff will get passed, red flag laws, things like that, and then what I'm expecting is that they will end up in court. They will get fought and they will get defeated. A lot of these things, but it's going to be a constant battle, and we need gun owners to really step up and get involved, because a lot of times people will say, oh, well, somebody else will take care of that. Well, no, it's us. We, the gun owners, we conservatives need to take care of this stuff ourselves at the grassroots level. So sign the petitions, call your senators, email your senators, get in front of the TV cameras, get on radio shows, do whatever you can to make your voice heard and spread the good word, and try to help these nut job anti-gun radicals in a nice way understand that they've been manipulated to fear guns, and help them see that gun ownership is not as bad as they think it is. Because that helps. It helps the narrative, and just don't call them nut jobs because they don't like that very much. But help them see. And then on the other hand, there's some good news. Parkland, Florida. Could we have a minute to talk about the? Let me
do this. I've got a loaded bank of phones, so let's take some phone calls and we'll talk about Parkland here in just a moment. We'll start with you, caller. You're on KRMS. Good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. Outstanding program today.
Thank you.
I heard you mention earlier about some school program teaching gun safety.
Yes, sir.
I think education, it seems like a no-brainer. If you don't know what to do with a gun, you shouldn't be around one. But if you're educated about it, they're nothing more than a tool, or perhaps a recreational vehicle. Now, my brother and I were taught firearm safety from as far back as I can remember. And we were turned loose in the woods at 6 years old with a shotgun. So Dad had guns in the closet and ammunition on the shelf. We had access to it, but we knew better than to mess with it. Education.
Thank you for your phone call, sir. I appreciate it.
Have a great day.
You do the same. Great. Let's take another phone call. Caller, thanks for holding. You're on KRMS. Good morning.
Hey, KB, good morning. I think what we have to understand, and I think we understand this, but we've got to get the other side to understand, is the firearm is not for hunting. It's to protect ourselves from, a brutal government. And if we lose our firearms, not only could that happen, that will happen. Half the governments in the world are dictatorships, and they murder their own people. And so that the gun is the only thing keeping our government in check. And, I mean, I believe that, and we've got to get the other side to believe that. And I don't know how we address that issue.
Thank you for the phone call. Dan, any thoughts on the caller there saying that we need to address this issue, and how do we do that?
I totally agree with him. And, he's right. The most important reason for gun ownership is to protect ourselves from tyrannical governments and to protect ourselves and our families and our loved ones on a local level. How do we convince them? Well, it's difficult because if they are convinced, they're brainwashed to fear guns. But if we can help them see some and talk to them about giving them maybe scenarios of how do they protect themselves, help them see that the potential is there for them to be attacked, or for them to be their house to be broken in, or whatever, and help them really try to understand the importance of the self-defense part of it. We can have conversations with people. They're not all radicals. I was on the other side of the fence at one time too, until I had a situation in my life that flipped me, and it helped me see reality. So unfortunately, not everybody's going to. Well, fortunately, everybody's not going to be put in a situation like that. But if we can just have conversations with Christmas is coming, talk to your family members and help them understand that guns aren't as scary as they have been taught to believe.
And I think you bring up a very, very good point, a very valid point there, is sitting down and I've heard you say two things here. The first one was earlier when you were talking about don't rely on other people to do the job that you should be out there doing. That's number one. Take the time to get involved. Don't sit back and say somebody else is going to do it for me. And then here talking in this conversation as well, understanding what would you do if somebody came up to you and threatened your life? I mean, what would you do? Would you be able to take care of them through some other means of self-defense, like martial arts or something along those lines? What would you do? And really make them stop and understand that, we're not trying to take guns and go out and hurt innocent people. We are just trying to protect ourselves, and certainly that is the goal. That is, and it has always been the goal. Self-defense. 9:53. Let's take another phone call here, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Parkland, Florida. Caller, thanks for joining us here on KRMS. Good morning.
Yeah, good show, KB.
Thank you.
Hey, I was wondering if the speaker there could give us an example. I get the personal thing, but to fight a government with your home defense weapon, I was wondering if you could give a clear example of how a citizen would protect themselves when the SWAT team come or the U.S. military come to your house, how you would take them out.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that I can answer it. You know, the idea there is, you know, that's a visual that, you know, okay, the SWAT team is coming to the door, and there you are with your firearm. Are you going to take them all out? No, you're not gonna. But the idea that Americans have firearms and can defend themselves on the local level like that, or can you know, develop militias and group together. Just the idea of that is the deterrent that we've been using. You know, so yeah, that little picture that you just painted is a lose situation for the gun owner in his home. So there's no way to answer that question. That's not going to win. The idea, though, is having the ability to build that militia. Because here's the thing, you know, they say the rights for militia to form, but without firearms, without access to firearms, militias would never form. So that's been the thing. So just the idea that gun owners are armed, Americans are armed, is enough for the government to know that's enough of a deterrent, which is why they're trying to disarm Americans. So I hope that kind of answered your question, but I can't specifically answer that one picture you painted.
Well, you have to have, if you live in a county like ours, you got to have a good solid county sheriff, and we do here. That's something that I know that we've talked about with him before. We've got just a few minutes left. We want to take some time and talk to us a little bit about what's going on down there in Parkland, Florida. I think we've heard this maybe briefly in national news.
Well, there was a public safety commission formed after the shooting in 2018, and Parkland. What they want to do is they want to create a state law that would allow teachers to be armed, and advocates say that it could help students keep students safe in the event of a school shooting. And there's a Pinellas County Sheriff Bob Gutierrez who chairs the commission, supports the measure, and he says we have to give people a fighting chance. We got to give them a chance to protect themselves, in my view. We don't have enough to put cops in every school or multiple cops in every school, and we're not maximizing use of the Guardian program, and one good guy with a gun on campus is not adequate, he said. So this is good news. This is a school deciding that they want to be armed because they see the logical reality there. That, you know, if somebody comes into the school and nobody's armed, well, then it's a killing spree. But if somebody can oppose that killer with a firearm, it just makes perfect sense. And let me just add, KB, do I have another minute?
Yes.
Okay, let me just add that with all that said, where I live in Saratoga Springs, New York, we have a school board who just voted 5-4 to disarm their security guards after 30 years of them being armed with no incident. So you'll have all over the country. It's on and off. It's really contrasted in the way some counties, some states view this versus others. So it's really crazy. But the commission, the school board rather in Saratoga Springs is the people who voted against, the people who voted to disarm the security guards are Brad Thomas, Jennifer Leidig, Patricia Morrison, Heather Reynold, and Anje Emeka. And I went to a board meeting, and there's another one tonight that I'm going to be going to talk about the importance of keeping those security guards armed. But these anti-gun folks, they're so indoctrinated with this belief that guns can all just go away that they're putting people in danger.
Well, I will say that here locally we have companies that will go into schools and teach people who are interested in learning how to A lot of times you'll have somebody who's got maybe law enforcement experience, maybe some sort of a military background. They would be a perfect candidate for something like this, Dan. And these people, these companies, go around and they teach these schools, and then these schools put signage out in front of the schools saying, listen, if you're here to cause problems or cause harm to any of these students, we have armed people in this school. You're not going to know who they are. Could be a member of faculty, could be a janitor, could be a teacher, could be anybody. But if you come in this school to do harm, there's a good possibility that you will be stopped dead in your tracks. And I use that dead figuratively as well as literally, if indeed there's some sort of a person who wants to go into a school with a firearm and cause problems, wreak havoc, whatever the case may be. So a lot of our schools here, and we do see various schools locally that have, and there are some in this area that have gone through the training process necessary. Hey, listen, my friend, we're just about out of time. Wanted to thank you as always, and hopefully we can continue this conversation into 2019.
I have a feeling we'll still be talking about it, KB. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, sir, and Merry Christmas to you and your family. That is Dan Wos. We're ready for CBS Local News in Hour 2 after this.
If you want more interviews by me, click one of the videos on the right. And remember, your Second Amendment, it's not a privilege, it's your right.